Welcome to the Independent School Podcast with me, Juliet Corbett. As an executive coach and strategy advisor, I guide senior leaders in the world of education to find their strategic focus, empower their teams, and regain control over their time, helping them to go from exhausted to strategic. On this podcast, I share the ideas and tips that I've developed over the years to help the leaders that I've worked with one-to-one, so that I can help you to focus on your priorities and achieve your goals with confidence and ease. And this week we have an exciting guest joining us to dive into a host of topics covering coaching, innovation, empowerment, strategy, and so on. This is a really experienced head. I'm delighted to be joined by Claire Robinson. Claire started teaching in 2001 following a successful career in financial services. She joined Holme Grange School as head in 2009, and since then Claire has led the expansion of the school from 210 pupils to 684, including extending the age range. They now offer education from 3 to 16, taking pupils all the way up to GCSE level. During this time, the buildings and the facilities have grown to include a state-of-the-art theatre, cutting-edge classrooms and study spaces. Holme Grange School has won a host of awards over the years, as has Claire herself, including Head Teacher of the Year in the South East at the National Teaching Awards. Claire and I have a conversation to share with you that spans a whole host of different topics, but some of the things that we specifically dive into is how to balance involving staff in strategy development, alongside the fact that often the strategic choices that we're making at the school senior leadership level have to be confidential, how senior leaders can be empowering their teams more. We talk about the importance of strong professional development programs, an openness to innovation and how that feeds that into that professional development program. And the overarching theme of what we're discussing is why the development of your people within the school and the development of that strategy for that school are so inextricably interlinked. They go hand in hand every single step of the way. So without any further ado, let's dive into my conversation with Claire Robinson. So welcome, Claire, to the Independent School Podcast. It is fantastic to have you with us here today.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Fantastic. So I love hearing about the root of people's passion for education. One of the reasons that I really feel connected to the education sector is because there is this root often that comes from our early experiences, our identity, that really makes us feel a shared passion for the impact of education. So is there a reason that you in particular forged a career within the school sector? What's the root of that passion for you?
For me, I think it's really witnessing the growth and development of young minds, because I think that that's incredibly rewarding, and the power of knowledge and transformative knowledge that we can give to young people. I've decided that I want to create that positive environment that allows that and recognises that we're all different. And having worked in business before coming into education, looking at the world that our young people are entering, which obviously is constantly changing, I think we have to do something about our schools and equip them to be places that are enjoyable experiences for young people, identifies and recognises their uniqueness and allows them all to flourish.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the way that you talk about young minds. It's these young minds that are going to solve the problems of tomorrow. I know it's a cliche, but it's true, isn't it? It's curating these beautiful young minds that are going to be resilient enough and curious enough about the world to go out and make a difference.
Absolutely. And I think that's, again, it's that world has changed and continues to change, doesn't it? So in schools, we would be foolish not to change with it, which is exciting.
It is, exactly. Fantastic. So you've obviously been ahead for some time now. When you stepped up into that leadership position, did you find that some things were had to shift and change around the way that you were thinking about strategy? So did that strategic mindset naturally come to the fore at that point, or was it something that you've worked on during your headship?
I think, to be honest, it's probably a bit of both, because I moved into education from being in financial services for 14 years and having a career in financial services and leadership at that level. So to some extent, that gave me, I think, a benefit. It supported me with the things I needed to know. When the first thing you're given when you take up your first headship is a budget and told to go and sort it, then I think having had some experience was hugely beneficial. But it also highlighted for me the fact that in the world of education, most of our leaders come from within the ranks. And because you make a good teacher doesn't necessarily mean you make a good leader. And we need both. We need both in schools. So I think for me, it has been something that's constantly, I have to continue to develop myself to enable me to be of use to the people that I'm leading and to the children and the community that I serve. So I think that strategic part of it grows. I had some experience, but I've had to make sure that I continue to go on and develop myself and develop my team. And I think that's the crucial element, isn't it, really? You want to develop your team so that they can go on and be really, truly effective leaders too.
Exactly. And what comes to mind is the fact that you were just talking about the changing world that our young people are going to be going out into. And of course, this also impacts us as we go through our career. And probably, I'm guessing that most teachers, when they start out in the profession, are really motivated about standing in front of a classroom and really helping those young people to be curious about the world. And actually, it's over time, our own careers shift and change. And it's that growth mindset and the strategic part of it. And as you say, managing budgets and all this sort of responsibility that comes with leading a whole school. It is that growth mindset that we're all evolving and changing through our career, isn't it?
It is. And I think it's that open mind, isn't it, as well, to be open to that change and to appreciate that you have to change with it. So that innovation needs to always be something that's at the forefront. Sometimes we have to take a few risks. So that sort of sometimes that goes against what we want to do. But I think all of those elements, as you say, with that growth mindset, it's not what we're doing now or what we can do now. It's about looking and recognizing and constantly seeking what we can achieve going forward. And that's where I think the strategic piece comes in. You're always looking ahead and what you can do to go forward. So you have to have that vision whilst really retaining the values that you have and believe so strongly.
Absolutely. And of course, part of that strategic mindset is knowing that you're not always going to get it perfectly right. The idea that you're trying things out, strategic trial and error, and there's no such thing as a project that fails. It's a project where we learned a lot about what worked, what didn't. And that sense of taking risk is inherent, isn't it, within the idea of being strategic.
Was learning lessons for me with the strategic piece is that as a leader, you go ahead in your own mind and you plan all those things and you think all those things, but you can't do it in isolation because and when you speak to your team, they're not at the same point as you are because you have already taken that journey in your mind and in your head. But you need to have that dialogue and that discussion and that trust with your team to be able to flesh out all the elements that might not be quite where your mind was taking it, but also allow them the time to come and catch up with it and get on the bus, if you like, get on that journey with you. I read Jim Collins' Good to Great when I was in financial services, and I think the application of that within the educational world, we can't underestimate that, and the power of that is really, really important.
Yeah, it's fascinating actually that so many heads and actually chairs of governors as well that I talk to come to me with exactly that description of a challenge, which is we know what we want, but everyone else hasn't got there yet. And I think what's really interesting as you describe that is involving the team, and that would include senior leaders or governors depending on the exact setting, but involving that group of people who are going to actually need to go on that journey together, and then thinking about how you involve middle leaders, thinking how you involve the whole staff. And it's not about co-creating from scratch, because that would take forever and wouldn't be very efficient, but it also isn't about just presenting to those people a set plan, a strategy. It's about finding a way that you can involve all those different groups. And I think that comes to the question of developing school strategy and an approach to school strategy. How do you do that at Holme Grange? Do you find that having a whole school strategic plan is the best way to go, and you found that to work?
Yes, we do have a strategic plan, and if effectively we have two, because we have at different levels, because there are certain elements of strategy that some of the staff don't need to be aware of, and they don't have to be worried or concerned about elements of the very larger picture, because you need to present that part of it to them when it's been fully fleshed out and you've taken out all the elements that are going to concern them and give them their worries, and allow them to continue to do their job. But there's also parts that very much involve them on the day-to-day, on the ground, and development of, I suppose, from all intents and purposes, teaching and learning and pupil outcomes. Yeah. So that strategic piece, I think you do, and you constantly review, but you also allow people time to lead that themselves, to work within teams, to have advocates, and to drive that themselves so that they get their own buy-in from each other. Mm-hmm. And then the larger strategic piece, you start off with different parts of the school based dependent upon what elements you're doing. So, for example, one of our strategic pieces was to develop a sports complex. And 2 years ago, that was a decision that we made, that we would go ahead and we would proceed. Now, that's a really good news piece. That story is positive. It's positive for the community. The staff want to know about it. The parents want to know about it. So we were able to share that at that point. But obviously the market has changed and the economy has changed and the threats have changed over the last 2 years.
Absolutely.
So our direction has had to change. So we've actually said, well, we're going to put that on hold for the moment, and then how we communicate that. And then there are other elements that we're dealing with around that the school not everybody in the school needs to be involved with or aware of. So they've still got the good news piece and it's there somewhere, but at the moment it's being dealt with in a different way by a different group of people at a different level. So I think strategy has so many different elements and levels within that, and it's about enabling you to have the right people in at the right time, and all around that element, a bit of trust, really, isn't it?
Yes. I think that's what makes it endlessly fascinating for me. And I love the fact that you've got the centrality of the teaching and learning, and that's what schools do. That's why they exist, is the way that they're teaching and learning. But then, so you've got a huge amount of involvement and bringing people together with that. But there's also a sense, obviously, within an independent school, a private school, we're talking about a business that needs to be sustainable going forward. And so there's quite a lot of analysis and market kind of anticipation or understanding of the marketplace, looking at financial resilience with regards to how borrowing is structured. Those are parts which are equally important and strategically very important, but that's not quite the same as the whole purpose of the teaching and learning, which everyone needs to get involved with. There's a sense of actually a smaller group needing to know all of the details around that in order to be really effective at the way your governance is working and your leadership is working to create a sustainable business, which then, of course, allows you to deliver that absolutely exceptional teaching and learning over time. So, a lot in there that I think schools are discovering through time that becomes really important because of the changing situation and the way that the situation has evolved, as you said, over the last couple of years. It seems to be we went from the pandemic through inflation and now potentially tax changes coming up around the corner as well. It is quite a challenging time, isn't it?
It is. And I suppose for when you've been ahead for some time, I suppose it's like age with anything, really, isn't it? You understand that there are certain things that are cyclical, and the economy does come around and go round in cycles. And this isn't the first recession that we've been in, and how schools react in those. But I think probably for me is over recent years, and with that strategic piece, and in independent schools in particular, the role of the head has changed dramatically, and that the requirements of a head has changed. The pandemic, what heads were doing within that pandemic, and then beyond that, I think we've seen a dramatic shift in our schools, and we've seen lots of heads no longer heads and have made that decision to do that. But I think that the role has changed, and we have to acknowledge that, and we have to develop ourselves constantly and constantly pull on a pool of our pool of each other. Headship was at one point a very, very lonely job, and to some extent it still is. But I think the networking opportunities within the heads associations has changed as well. So there are people that you can talk to and communicate with and have those conversations with, because we're all in the same boat. And I think actually that was probably the result of the pandemic, where everybody started those discussions during that period and found that it was actually beneficial, as opposed to we're all constantly at each other's competitor and looking at how we can't talk to each other. I think we've learned how we can talk to each other and how that can make our pool and our knowledge base so much stronger, and therefore we're much more of use and benefit in our own schools.
Yeah, absolutely. I have no doubt at all that you're right, that the pandemic triggered some of that openness. I think what's really interesting to me is also, if we zoom out, there's a shift in what we define as good leadership, which a couple of decades ago would have been, strong, very robust leadership. And now actually the importance of actually showing vulnerability at times, the importance of acknowledging that we don't do this alone as leaders, that we rely on empowering teams around us, enables actually us to also see perhaps this is a shift within a larger dialogue of what leadership is, and that it's okay to acknowledge that sometimes things don't go to plan, and it's how you respond to that, which is the mark of a good leader. And maybe that allows heads to be talking between each other in a slightly more open way. I don't know whether you feel that that's true as well.
I think it is. I think the day of the egotistical leader and the glory leader has gone, and I don't think there's space for those in our schools anymore, and I don't think people have the time for that. I think people want to support each other. I do think the head has to be extremely resilient. If governors are looking for heads now, I think the skill set probably is slightly different to one that they may have been looking at 10 years ago. And I think that resilience and the people skills are far more important, but they've also got to have that strategic mindset, etc., and the vision and the opportunity to network with others, and the willingness to network with others, to seek how they can look to see what they can bring back and what they don't need to bring back as well, because it is also about filtering. And within our being an independent school, the beauty is we are independent. So what one school may be doing brilliantly doesn't mean it's going to be right, and we should all get on that bandwagon and start doing that in our schools. So it is about filtering as well.
Absolutely. And strategy is as important to make sure you know what you're not going to do as what you are going to do. It is that filter, you say. You mentioned the importance of people skills in leadership, and we've talked already about the importance of involving others and empowering teams to deliver strategies, especially where we're talking about the teaching and learning element of that strategy. I wonder what techniques or tips or tricks that you've seen working well when you're thinking about delegating effectively and empowering others in a school. Is this something where you've seen certain things work really well?
Yes, there is. I think primarily for me, I've always believed very strongly in professional development and providing professional development opportunities, but not going on a course. I don't think going on a course solves our problems or develops our staff.
Yeah, agreed.
I think it has to be, again, a strategy for professional development. What does that look like? How are you going to do that? And then you get people coming on board with that. And as I said, you then get your advocates who then lead that. So you empower them to take it forward. And I think that's a huge benefit, because you develop your leaders and you have your leaders leading, and you don't have a leader with lots of followers, but you have lots of leaders underneath them.
Yes.
And for me, the best compliment is when a member of your staff gets promoted, or a member of staff comes in with an idea and they think that this might be good in your school, and you don't even have that role in your school yet, but you actually give them an opportunity to say, well, prove to me that role is essential in our school. Go out and do something and allow it, empower them to do it. Allow them to be innovative, allow them to share their ideas and be creative and take the risks. And I think that then builds teams within your team. And those teams breed enthusiasm. They motivate others, they inspire others by the work that they do. So last year I brought in every member of staff, irrespective of role, had to engage in a research project. Very simple. They had to do something that was going to impact on pupil progress, pupil engagement, and even the teaching assistants, the admin staff, everybody had to be involved with this. Now, when this was first introduced, some staff were petrified at the thought of it. When they actually got together and they looked at how possible this was and what they could do, the work that's come out of that has been phenomenal. And we've got people now wanting to go and do more. Mm-hmm. But that I haven't led that. They've led that themselves, if you like, because they found for themselves what the result and the impact of that is, and what they did. Yeah. So they want more of it. Yeah. So I think it's about allowing them to develop, allowing them to be creative and innovative themselves, and making sure that they can come and talk and give you those ideas and that you're open to them. It's not, no, we can't do that yet.
Yes, I love that. And it's all about creating a culture that embraces change and encourages innovation. And sometimes it's about creating the structure in which they can be innovative. So maybe that's thinking about what budget there might be for ideas that crop up during the year, thinking about how those research kind of projects that you described might be kind of fitting in amongst other commitments they have, and which groups are going to be working together. So you can create a structure in which they can work, but the actual ideas that bubble up, as a leader, you have no control of that. Is a wonderful thing. You have no control over what ideas will bubble up. And as long as the structure has set the strategic parameters of what it is that you're trying to achieve in terms of the vision, and you mentioned there pupil progress, pupil engagement as being some of the parameters around what you set, then it's so inspirational, isn't it, to see what people come up with. And they always come up with such more creative, innovative, insightful ideas than any group of senior leaders sitting around a boardroom would do. I think it's really exciting, isn't it?
It is, because they see it from a different perspective.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we have to be able to look at it from every angle, but don't always have the time to do that.
Yeah.
So I think by doing it that way, we're also looking at embedding a coaching culture across the school. And we started that with the senior team, and then we've gone down to the staff and the pupils.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, has changed people's mindset. When I brought it into the senior team, I think a lot of staff on the team thought, well, this is a bit of a waste of time.
Yeah.
Why are we doing it? But as they got into it, it changed their perception, and it changed how they operated with their team. And they have been, by the end of it, at the end of the 12 months, they were enthusiastic, and they wanted to do more because they saw the impact of what they were doing. And that's then empowered others to want to do it.
I think this idea of a coaching culture, which is incredibly difficult to say, I have to say, apart from that, I think it again, this is an idea that you see beyond the education sector in many companies that are embedding coaching within their hierarchical line management and within their mentoring programs, but seeing how it has absolutely flourished within a school environment. And this is happening globally as well. It isn't just within the UK. I've seen this in schools across all different international cultures, where the coaching approach breaks down some of the hierarchical barriers, enables the potential of individuals to really shine through. And I also think it ties back to some of that conversation earlier around actually in a one-to-one coaching relationship between two people. It doesn't really matter where they are in the hierarchy, whether they're staff or pupils or whatever it might be. Again, it encourages a safe place for someone to express some concerns, I'm having a tough week, I'm having a tough term. That idea of being able to express vulnerability at times is really important. I think it's all part of one larger trend, isn't it? So powerful, that idea of coaching within schools.
I think it is. Research would also indicate, though, lots of businesses who say they have put in coaching training for staff, there's an awful lot, but the number of people that feel they've actually been coached is quite minimal, because I think we still have people that are being told what to do or given the solutions, whereas by empowering them through the coaching to to actually reach the solution themselves is far more liberating for them, and it allows them to mature and to grow, and actually makes them believe in themselves a great deal more. So you get far more out of it at the end of the day.
Absolutely. That's really interesting. I think you're absolutely right about the amount of training doesn't necessarily equate to the amount of coaching that's going on. And one of the things possibly is it's often easier, it feels like it's quicker as a leader to just tell everyone what to do. It feels like I'm going to spend a lot of time coaching everybody to come to the conclusion that I've already seen, but actually it pays off over time, and over actually a relatively short period of time. It pays off, doesn't it, to give them that ability to be empowered to make their own decisions, and occasionally to make the wrong decision. That's fine, assuming that it's in a risk profile that's so appropriate to their level of responsibility, and to make sure that actually over time they're learning from those decisions that are improving over time. It is worth the investment of time. It doesn't always feel like it in the moment.
Yeah, I think so. I think the difficulty is that perhaps, and I think I've grown and learned as a leader over the years as well. When you first become a leader, your thoughts are that you are the one that everybody wants to be the one that's making the decisions, and you've got to be the one that's there, showing that strength.
Yeah.
So if you don't tell somebody what to do, you're failing in some way. And I think you learn over the years that's just so wrong, absolutely wrong. And actually, you're just disempowering them by telling them all the time.
Yeah. And I think sometimes actually some of the conversations I've had over the last sort of year or so, actually, people sometimes feel when they're stepping up into a leadership role, maybe for the first time, or stepping up into a headship role for the first time, potentially, that they're being paid for their expertise. In actual fact, that's rarely the case. You're being paid for your ability to lead a group of people in a constructive strategic direction. Yes, your expertise will come into that, but you're not being paid to have all of the answers on the tip of your tongue at every moment, because that disempowers everybody. Sometimes there's a shifted mindset that's required, especially as you're in that transition into leadership, perhaps.
I think so. And I think it's also about you're paid to develop and for the potential that you have to lead that organisation forward. It's like any post, isn't it? When I appoint now, I learned quite quickly, you don't appoint the person who can do the job. You appoint the person who has got the capability and the ability and the potential to do that job. And then you work with them to enable them to, and you end up with a much stronger person in post. Yeah. But you can't expect them to do it straight away.
Absolutely.
And I think in headship and in leadership, it's no different, really. You have to give people confidence. You have to be able to communicate. You have to be able to give people time. But it is all about that people piece and how you develop that people piece alongside that strategic piece. And the two can go together, and in fact have to go together for the strategic piece to be successful.
Absolutely. Oh, I couldn't put it better myself. Absolutely fantastic. So as we wrap up our conversation, Claire, I wondered whether you have any practical tips for leaders around managing daily priorities, balancing the demands of their roles, and maintaining strategic focus. It's a busy job, headship. Do you have any tips for people on how to manage that balance?
I think asking a head that question is probably quite challenging, because heads try to do everything and feel they have to do everything. I suppose the tip is you don't. Yes. You don't have to do everything. There are people, and you have got to be the one that makes that decision as to how you're going to manage that, because it's very easy to then take it on yourself. Yeah. So I think it's about taking the time to reflect on your team, reflect every term, not every year, but how you are developing your people. And that's people at all levels, because even developing people in your admin team could have a huge impact on the leadership within the school. So there's so many different elements of it. But I think making time for that, making time for those strategic decisions and strategic meetings, as opposed to just having a weekly SMT meeting. Make sure you have a strategic meeting where strategy is on the agenda and you are there looking at what you are doing. Make sure that you have someone somewhere, either within your organisation or outside your organisation, that you can share those moments where actually you know your bucket is full, because your bucket will get full. And if you don't have that, then when that bucket overflows, I think that can have quite a dramatic impact. I've seen that on so many occasions. But I would say maintain your focus on the strategy, make time for that, make time for the development of your team, and make time for development of your staff, and stay true to the values and the mission that you have for your school. Because yes, other schools, and you mentioned it earlier, think about what you are not as well as what you are. And sometimes you may have to stop doing something in order to start doing something else, and that's okay. But make those decisions. Be brave and bold and believe in yourself.
Exactly. I think that is an absolutely perfect summary. I'm sure many people listening to that will find that really helpful. And I think it is believing in yourself and believing that you will grow over time, you will grow into the role, you will discover what works for you personally, as well as it's absolutely critical to make time for those strategic level discussions. Thank you so much, Claire. It has been a delight to have you with us here today. Wonderful contribution to the Independent School Podcast. Thank you so much again.